In a world where the dead never stop coming and the living are pushed to their limits, every moment becomes a battle to stay alive. Heroes rise, humanity falls, and survival is the only law that remains. This is where every zombie story begins. Welcome to the ultimate zombie recap season. At a prestigious university in Bangkok, a terrifying zombie virus erupts out of nowhere, and within minutes, the number of infected skyrockets, plunging the entire campus into chaos as a handful of survivors barricade themselves in a locked classroom, with every exit outside buried beneath swarms of undead. And Ning frantically calls her Professor Roy, begging him to check on her bedridden mother, who has been unable to move for over 6 months and now has no way to escape. And out in the hallway, zombies slam violently against the door, forcing Ning to hang up as a breaking news report flashes on TV, announcing that the government has declared a state of emergency for all of Bangkok, with the origin of the outbreak traced to Ning's university. And Roy frowns, quietly slipping into his bedroom, opening a metal case filled with strange medications, then staring at Ning's mother deep in troubled thought. And meanwhile, another cluster of survivors in a different classroom struggles to reinforce their barricade, while Prao urgently tells Kao that their shelter will fall sooner or later and they must escape immediately, suggesting they climb out the window and gather on the balcony outside. And from the sports field below, haunting screams rise into the air, tightening everyone's chests with dread. And Tai spots movement on a balcony across the courtyard, where survivors are climbing out, and Ning's younger brother Nan appears, recognizing Ning and calling her in relief. And before anyone can savor the moment, a body plummets from an upper floor, sending waves of terror through both groups. And once they regain their composure, Fu grabs Ning's phone and insists they must head for the library, which is under renovation and likely has fewer people and therefore fewer zombies. And after quickly agreeing, the two balcony groups decide the library is their best chance. But the distance is long and the path filled with undead, making every step agonizingly slow. And Fa keeps calling her father, fearing he might be in danger, until Prao snatches the phone, warning that noise will only draw more zombies. But it is already too late, as the undead begin surrounding them, leaving the balconies impossible to descend. And Chin pulls out a Bluetooth speaker, suggesting they plant it in the opposite building to lure the zombies away with loud sound. And everyone agrees, although no one volunteers to place it. And Prao finally steps up bravely, taking the speaker and edging along the wall, while the anxious group watches, gripping their hands tight. And just then Lee checks her phone and sees the government's emergency notice announcing the shutdown of all electricity, water, and communication across the infected area, enraging the group as they feel utterly abandoned. And Prao reaches the center of the main hall, carefully placing the speaker down, when suddenly the Bluetooth startup chime rings out, freezing her in terror. As she scans the area, expecting a horde, but seeing nothing, she breathes out, only for a zombie to appear silently on the second-floor balcony above. And while disaster looms over, Prao, Ning's group makes progress, though slowed by Nan, who twists her ankle, and every small sound she makes draws wandering zombies, forcing the group to freeze completely still in the darkness, aware that zombies chase sound and are drawn to bright lights, so all they can do is stay in the shadows and hope they remain unseen. And Prao, seeing the zombie hasn't noticed her, wipes the sweat from her brow and hurries back to the balcony, where Chin blasts loud music through the speaker, and instantly the thunder of feet erupts as zombies flood toward the sound, giving both survivor groups a precious chance to move toward the library. But Nan can no longer walk, and Pal kneels to carry her just as a drop of blood lands before them, and a zombie dangling from a tree drops straight onto Pal, knocking him to the ground. And as Nan screams, Pal kicks the zombie away, but the creature lunges back and sinks its teeth into her calf. And hearing the commotion, more zombies rush toward them, forcing the others to pull away the shell-shocked boy with the middle part hairstyle, leaving Nan behind to face the approaching horde alone. Everyone swallowed their grief and rushed into the library just in time to collide with Prao's group, and the two sisters Ning and Nan finally reunited, clinging to each other in relief, while the others hurried to barricade the main entrance. And Fu seemed to be right, because there were no zombies anywhere inside, making the library the safest shelter for now. And Fa tried calling her father again, only to realize there was no signal at all. And Lee reminded them that the government had already warned that electricity, water, and communication would be completely cut off, leaving everyone with a chilling heaviness as the reality sank in that they had essentially been dropped into a doomsday survival scenario. And San voiced the fear hiding in all their hearts, insisting they needed to find a way to escape, because without resources, they would not last long. But Ning immediately argued that stepping outside now was suicide, and their only hope was to call for help and wait. And then the bespectacled boy Nai emerged, holding a radio, likely left behind by repair workers, and through the static came a repetitive emergency announcement saying the entire district around the university had been sealed by the military, and that electricity and water would be cut at 8:30 p.m., urging survivors to move to higher ground where helicopters would retrieve the uninfected by day, and doubt spread through the group because although they now knew the outbreak had begun at their school, none of them had any clue before this, and San suddenly remembered that the library rooftop had a parking deck perfect for a helicopter evacuation, but Ning insisted they had to announce this information to the entire campus, and San opposed it, warning that it would only create chaos, while Den secretly supported Ning. And Prao watched all of this with cold amusement before declaring that in zombie movies, the moment someone does something stupid, it is always the side characters who die. And although her bluntness irritated everyone, Ning ignored it and marched upstairs to the broadcasting room, turning on the loudspeaker system, before repeating the radio message calling all survivors to move to the rooftop and prepare for helicopter rescue. And her clear, determined voice echoed through every building of the school, and Sans tried to stop her, worried she was inviting danger. But Ning went even further, announcing that the library was the safest gathering point, just as the power abruptly shut off, signaling that the government had begun its blackout protocol, and the campus plunged into darkness, scattering the zombies who had collected beneath streetlights, while countless terrified survivors hiding in classrooms, hallways, and storage rooms snapped their attention toward the library with desperate, hungry eyes. And Nan, who had tragically died earlier, suddenly opened her pale, milky eyes, rising to her feet and staggering forward as she merged into the slowly moving sea of undead. And inside the library, Fa kept calling her father, despite knowing there was no signal, only tormenting herself, while Li tried to comfort her. But Fa lashed out, saying her father sold goods near the school gate and struggled to walk. And since she hadn't heard from him all day, he was probably dead. And Prao finally lost her temper and snapped that, if Fa was so worried, she could go find him herself. And Laya immediately defended Fa, and tensions flared until others stepped in to stop a fight, while Den quietly approached Fa and soothed her with kind words, catching Ning's lingering attention, which made San bristle with jealousy. And at that moment, Nan burst into the hall, urging everyone to look outside. And through the night vision camera, they saw something disturbingly unnatural, as all the zombies were moving in perfect coordination, as if directed by a shared consciousness, leaving the survivors confused, because these creatures seemed nothing like the mindless monsters from movies. And Ning insisted that speculation was pointless, because tomorrow they had to reach the rooftop no matter what, and they needed rest to regain strength. And although everyone agreed, none of them could truly sleep, and Dawn finally broke with San, declaring that it was time, instructing everyone to split up, gather weapons, and return to the library by exactly 7 o'clock so they could head to the rooftop parking lot together to await rescue. After everyone dispersed, San secretly called Den aside and coldly warned him to stay away from Ning, and Den sensed the provocation, but Sans only sneered, saying Den knew nothing about her, because Ning had already made an agreement with Professor Roy, and the two were secretly researching something connected to the strange illness tormenting her mother. And while that revelation hung in the air, the other students had already started searching for weapons, with Prao happily finding a toolbox and shouting for her teammates, just as Nai stared out the window wide-eyed because he had spotted zombies returning. And at the same moment, the others realized something was terribly wrong, since all main doors were barricaded. So how did the zombies get back in? And when Prao's group tried circling toward the main hall, they froze at the sight of a zombie calmly mopping the floor. And then it dawned on them, these zombies were staff members coming to work with ID cards granting them access through the employee entrance, meaning their planned route was now blocked by a crowd of diligent undead workers. And as Laya prepared to leap out the window to reach the main hall, Faye's broken phone suddenly blared an alarm, and she couldn't shut it off. And the crisp, relentless ringing drew every zombie toward her, forcing Leia to jump out the window, only to be taken down instantly by a zombie. While Fa, the cause of it all, refused to abandon her phone and fled in panic as a long line of zombies chased her. And when she reached the window, she saw Li had been bitten on the neck and screamed before continuing to run until she crashed into Ning's group, who were already trapped in the infested campus, with their only hope being the rooftop parking lot where military helicopters were supposed to rescue survivors. Yet the zombies behind them were gaining fast, and the guys used all their strength to force the fire door shut, buying precious seconds before releasing it and letting the undead flood the stairwell, while Prao hacked a path with scissors and led everyone out, only for another surge of zombies to pour into the hallway, trapping Fa, whose phone never stopped ringing, as she became the center of every creature's attention. And the others slammed the stairwell door shut and held their breath, while Pal nearly collapsed from shock, having seen Nan die yesterday, and Fa today. And then someone noticed a wound on Pal's arm, making everyone step back except San, who refused to abandon his brother, and Pal broke down, believing he was infected, and begging to give up until someone saw shards of glass inside the wound. and they realized it was only a scratch, and a wave of relief pushed them toward the rooftop just as a helicopter appeared overhead. But Ning fell one step behind, and through the gap saw a massive horde closing in, and she sprinted upward, shouting for everyone to run as the zombies burst from the stairwell, and the helicopter unleashed a barrage of gunfire, forcing Ning and the others to dive into another passageway. And they knew instantly the rooftop was no longer an option, so they ran back down to the parking level where they froze at the sight of Fa shambling toward them. Now a zombie, and Pal stepped forward in tears, desperate to say goodbye. But before he could, an axe suddenly struck, and the group recoiled in shock as 4 physical education students emerged and shouted for everyone to run, and Pao dragged the devastated Pal away, while he saw the PE student swing the axe again to finish Fa. And once both groups gathered inside the gymnasium, they finally took a moment to breathe, using vending machines for food and water, and Mo, who was close to Pal, treated his wound as the axe-wielding student Gut approached offering snacks, while Pal stared at the blood-smeared axe with Faye's death replaying in his mind. And Den was more interested in the pistol carried by the group's leader, who introduced himself as At and explained that he and his friend Khan were semi-professional shooting athletes, but they only had 1 box of bullets left, and firearms were dangerous to use because every shot summoned hordes of zombies. And Sans grew resentful, remembering Ning's brave announcement the night before, and wondering why these students hadn't come earlier, and the PE students laughed bitterly, saying only fools still trusted the government, because that so-called rooftop rescue was nothing but bait to gather survivors in one place, and their words triggered the horrifying memory of the helicopter mowing down desperate people with bullets instead of rescuing them. Ning's younger brother compared their situation to zombie movie logic because with the virus newly spreading, the government would never risk allowing anyone in the incubation stage to slip out, which meant no authority, however foolish, would truly let people leave the quarantine zone. And that grim realization finally crushed everyone's hopes of reaching the rooftop, and as tension thickened, Mo pulled off her baseball cap and lashed out at Ning, blaming her for broadcasting the rescue message the previous night, insisting that if she hadn't done that, the zombies wouldn't have swarmed the library since they had originally been moving toward the great auditorium. And the physical education students froze when they heard this, their eyes lighting up because Nan had actually recorded that strange scene. And when At and his group exchanged glances, it became obvious they had suspected something too, as they secretly tailed the horde last night and caught a glimpse of a zombie that appeared to be commanding the others, though the chaos forced them to flee before confirming anything. And now At wanted to return tonight to investigate, believing that if this creature truly was a leader, then killing it might change everything. Yet Ning and Mo immediately dismissed this idea as reckless and delusional, asking mockingly if he thought this was some kind of zombie hunting game. And before the argument could intensify, Fu revealed a new observation, that during yesterday's storm, when the temperature dropped to 25 degrees, the zombies moved sluggishly, but now, with the heat soaring above 40, they ran like machines, meaning their mobility was tied to temperature, which made At excitedly agree that waiting until nightfall would give them the best chance to act. But suddenly, Mo noticed that Pao was missing, and Den rushed outside just in time to see Pao struggling violently with one of the physical education students, while Gut, who had killed Fa earlier, lay bleeding out on the floor, and everyone hurried to stop Pao, whose grief and stress had pushed him to the breaking point, leaving San no choice but to knock him unconscious with an axe handle. And afterward, they tied Pao securely in a separate room, while the others tried desperately to patch Gut's wounds, and the surviving PE student explained that Pao had attacked them not for revenge, but because he had been trying to open the gymnasium door to let the zombies in. And San quickly explained that his brother had suffered from depression since childhood, had stopped taking his medication, and after witnessing Nan's death yesterday and Fa's death today, he had mentally snapped, and amid the chaos, suddenly realized 2 more people were missing, leading Mo to sneer that Nai and Kin had vanished, because earlier, while everyone fled the library, she had tried to drag those 2 along, but they encountered Lily barely clinging to life, and Kin, who was closest to her, collapsed in shock, forcing Mo to abandon them and chase after the main group, while Nai stayed behind to comfort Kin, until Lily suddenly resurrected as a zombie and lunged at them, forcing Nai to drag Kin into a desperate run all the way to the gym swimming pool, where the zombie followed them, but quickly drowned after jumping in, allowing the boys to escape toward the edge of the pool, just as members of the art department cheerleading squad arrived. And when their captain recognized Lily's corpse floating in the water, he dove in wailing, and they all worked frantically to pull her unconscious body to shore, since Lily had been a beloved junior on the squad. And meanwhile, At and the PE students insisted on heading for the great auditorium, and demanded Nan join them since he could record everything on camera. But Ning's face tightened with worry as she begged her younger brother not to take such a risk, saying lending the camera would be enough. Yet Nan stubbornly refused, unwilling to pass up such valuable footage, and At didn't waste time as he led the team quietly out of the gymnasium, just as the horde continued shambling toward the auditorium, just as they predicted. And back inside the gym, Mo's anxiety for Pal overwhelmed her, and while the others were distracted, she unlocked his room only to find him disturbingly changed, muttering that resistance was pointless, and that zombies were the ultimate evolution of humanity. And Mo's heart dropped as she finally understood that Pal's mind had fractured beyond repair, and when she said becoming a zombie was simply dying, he snapped in rage only to suddenly freeze as a flicker of clarity surfaced, and in a low broken whisper, he told Mo she would never understand him, before turning away and disappearing into the hallway, leaving behind a suffocating heaviness. And as he stepped through the main hall, he noticed blue veins crawling up Gut's skin, revealing that Gut was seconds away from turning. At this time, Ad and the others had reached the second floor of the great auditorium, where they crouched beneath the window frame, barely able to see the scene unfolding in the main hall. And Nan quietly raised his camera, capturing every second as a cleaning lady stood in the center, surrounded by a horde of zombies who behaved as if she were their true leader, some even offering her pieces of flesh like loyal followers. And when Nan's body was completely devoured, one zombie suddenly clutched its head and wailed in pain. And this series of synchronized reactions looked disturbingly like a pack of creatures following a rigid hierarchy, leaving At's group frozen in shock and gripping their weapons tight. While back in the gymnasium, Den's team heard a sudden disturbance and rushed over only to find Gut had transformed into a zombie, with the axe still buried in his skull, and Mo, who had been tied hand and foot, was discovered nearby, making it obvious Pal had orchestrated everything. And Gut's furious friend Thought stormed out of the gym with his gun ready, only to find Pal already outside, screaming excitedly toward the approaching zombies, declaring he had always longed to join their ranks. But before the undead could reach him, Thought caught up and fired shot after shot into Pal's thigh, and if Ning and Den hadn't thrown themselves between them, Pal would have been finished on the spot. Yet the noise they made echoed across the campus and instantly alerted the horde inside the auditorium, and the zombies burst out like a living waterfall with such force that the ground seemed to tremble. And At's team had barely set foot on the stairs when they collided head-on with the raging tide of undead, forcing them to scatter in terror, while Den subdued Thought and sprinted back to help the wounded Pal. And meanwhile, At's group found themselves fully surrounded as Khan seized his teammate's gun and emptied bullets into the oncoming swarm until his strength began to falter, and in one last desperate effort, he held the zombies back so the others could flee toward the gymnasium. But At's rage consumed him, and he refused to retreat, wanting to avenge his brother, until San spotted the chaos and sprinted in, grabbing At and dragging him out of the encirclement, shouting that this was not the time to die, and shaken back to reality. At finally ran with Den toward the Research and Development Center, where they hoped to take shelter, and once they caught their breath, At suddenly lifted his gun and aimed it at Pao, revealing a fresh bite on his arm, and knowing death was now inevitable, he screamed that Pao had doomed them all, and seeing Pao still smiling blankly, he tossed the remaining bullets to San and fired a single shot ending Pao's life, before turning the gun on himself with a swift motion that left Ning stunned and Den sobbing in agony. And after the chaos, Den suddenly remembered San's earlier words that Ning had secretly been helping a professor develop a drug to cure her mother, and Den recalled seeing elderly workers, including the same cleaning lady, lining up outside Professor Roy's lab late one evening. And when he connected that memory with the fact that the cleaning lady was revered by the zombies, a chilling realization struck him that perhaps the entire horde was the result of experiments Ning and the professor had created. And then came the truth that no one could have imagined, because a tiny immortal jellyfish was the origin of the disaster, and driven by desperation to cure Ning's mother, who had an incurable disease, the biology professor had worked tirelessly without sleep and under pressure from his sponsor, who demanded results within 3 weeks and even hinted that whatever shortcuts he took would be protected. The professor scoured endless research until he stumbled upon documentation about the immortal jellyfish, whose body produced a protein that allowed cells to regenerate endlessly, and convinced this was the key, he demanded a batch immediately. But because bureaucratic approvals would take too long, he decided to proceed illegally and began recruiting human test subjects, starting with the school cleaning lady, whom he persuaded with false promises of generous rewards in exchange for secrecy. And due to his impeccable reputation, countless impoverished workers quickly volunteered for the trial, believing they were fortunate to be chosen, and the cleaning lady even proudly told them to take their payment and hurry away before anyone discovered the arrangement, completely unaware that the serum extracted from the jellyfish would soon turn them into the very monsters now overrunning the school. As time passed, the cleaning lady's condition deteriorated rapidly, her spirit fading, her eyes sinking deep into their sockets, and her skin turning an ashen gray. And on that particular day, she struggled to even climb the stairs, and Ning was startled by her ghastly appearance, because although they had barely spoken over the years, they had known each other for 4 long years, and Ning urged her to go to the hospital. But thinking of her useless son who relied on her for money, the woman forced herself to endure and worked the entire day with a spinning head, only to come home to a text from her son demanding more cash. And as she scratched the back of her head in frustration, a clear jelly-like fluid clung to her fingers. And at that moment, the professor realized something was terribly wrong. And although he wanted to stop the medication, the cleaning lady begged to continue because she desperately needed the money, so he decided to run blood tests first. And when the results arrived, he nearly collapsed in terror, for her blood was swarming with parasites. And right then, he received a message containing a foreign research file Ning had gathered from her contacts, revealing that immortal jellyfish were highly susceptible to a particular parasitic infection, which gave the host enhanced regeneration, but also extreme aggression. And it was now undeniable that the professor's reckless experimentation had transferred the parasite into human bodies, and the consequences unfolded quickly. As the cleaning lady weakened further, blue veins bulged beneath her skin, and blood seeped from her back, and Ning lowered the professor's diary, realizing the true origin of the zombie outbreak. But Den's suspicion deepened, because Ning had long assisted the professor in researching a cure for her mother, and the professor's diary had been stored in a safe opened by Ning's brother's birthday as the password, and Ning admitted she was the one who gave the professor information on the immortal jellyfish, but she insisted she had been rejected by the professor when she proposed researching it, and had no idea he continued secretly. And just then, San discovered a USB inside the safe, and both believed it contained even more shocking truth. But before they could find a computer, San shoved Ning aside as, at whom they thought dead stood in front of them, now a zombie, and the two ducked behind a table, while Den remembered the gun Ad had dropped and formed a desperate plan, knocking on the glass door to lure the zombie's attention, while Ning slipped out the back door to retrieve the weapon. But just as she reached for it, the zombie snapped its head toward her, and San burst through the door, kicking the monster down and pinning its head, while Ning raised the gun without hesitation and fired, killing it instantly. And after wiping the blood from their clothes, Ning explained that Ad had been infected by the parasite before killing himself, so turning was inevitable, and San pocketed the USB, no longer able to wait for answers. And meanwhile, San's group finally returned to the gymnasium, battered and shaken, with 2 physical education students dead and Ning and Den missing, and San erupted at Mo, blaming her for releasing Pao and causing the chain of disasters, while Mo sat silently collapsed under guilt. Yet she saw through San's pattern, always posing as a leader, but blaming others whenever things fell apart, knowing today's scapegoat was her, but tomorrow someone else, and deciding not to engage, she turned to the footage of the zombie leader and immediately recognized the cleaning lady and wondered how an ordinary impoverished woman had become the matriarch of the undead. And then she noticed a detail. When the zombie Nan was devoured, one zombie wailed in grief as though losing its own child, and Mo suddenly remembered it was the same zombie that had bitten Nan, and everyone arrived at a terrifying realization that infection created a bond, like a twisted family tree, where a zombie biting a human formed a parent-child or mentor-student connection. And at that moment, Fu voiced an even more horrifying possibility, that every single zombie might be a descendant of the cleaning lady herself. In other words, the cleaning lady was in fact the very first zombie, and everyone immediately asked how she had been infected. And Sans reminded them that she worked in the natural sciences faculty where Ning studied, but now was not the time to dig into the cause because the priority was breaking the deadlock, and Mo proposed killing the cleaning lady, hoping the entire horde would collapse without their leader, while others feared that doing so would drive the zombies into a frenzy. And then the welfare committee member suggested a different approach. If the zombies retained human emotions, then capturing their leader alive and holding her hostage might neutralize the threat, because the horde might not dare act recklessly. And everyone agreed this was feasible, since zombies instinctively repeated the work they did when alive, and the cleaning lady as leader still followed her routine of cleaning the natural science dormitory every morning, making that the perfect window to take her alive. And although the idea sounded insane, it had a chance if executed carefully. And yet San once again appointed himself as leader and waded into assigning roles until the question of who would act as bait ignited a fight, and Mo snapped, demanding to know what made San the self-proclaimed leader, and argued that Fu was smarter, steadier, and far more responsible, making him the ideal choice. And when the others agreed, Fu stepped forward and immediately assigned their nerdy friend to serve as bait, but only from inside a room which was relatively safe. And Mo, who was familiar with the cleaning lady's schedule, noted that time was running out and they needed to move. And at the same moment, Ning set down the professor's USB as its last message revealed that all of this tragedy stemmed from a project called Annie Song. And many years ago, the professor and Ning's mother had been colleagues at a research institute until a co-worker framed her, and Ning's mother chose to take the blame, protecting the professor and the others. And she also did so because that co-worker had taken secret photos of her and the professor dating, despite both being married, so she had no choice choice but to disappear. And though she initially planned to turn herself in, finding out she was pregnant forced her to postpone it. And 3 years later, when things had calmed down, she returned home with baby Nan and introduced him to Ning as her younger brother. And because of her tarnished record, she could not return to scientific work and instead took small jobs at a local supermarket to raise her children. Until one day, she unexpectedly encountered Professor Roy again, who introduced her to a wealthy tycoon seeking someone to lead a highly confidential project requiring lifelong secrecy, and Ning's mother was the perfect candidate. And the project Anisong aimed to preserve cellular activity after death, not to achieve immortality, but to prevent decomposition, so the tycoon's family could resemble high-ranking monks whose incorruptible bodies generated reverence, authority, and long-term power. And with her strong background, Ning's mother progressed smoothly. But she never anticipated the tycoon's playboy relative Zhuo, and one day, a female assistant in the research team prepared a tube of semi-finished serum for mouse testing. When Zhuo drunkenly barged in with friends and seeing the assistant alone, he lunged at her overwhelmed with lust, but she preferred death to submission and seized the experimental tube, plunging it into his neck. And instantly, Zhuo panicked as strange sensations tore through his body, and he screamed, demanding to know what she had injected into him before losing control and beating her with a toolbox in a blind rage. And by the time Ning's mother rushed in, the assistant lay lifeless on the floor, already gone. Not long after, abnormal symptoms erupted through Zhuo's body, making it clear the semi-finished serum had taken hold. The tycoon, who had only one heir, demanded that Ning's mother immediately halt the Anisong project and devote every second to creating an antidote for his son. And although she had witnessed the assistant's brutal death with her own eyes, the incident was buried without a ripple, and Ning's mother once again saw the cruelty and coldness of the tycoon's family. And to shield her daughters from suspicion, she injected herself with the same semi-finished serum as Zhuo, hoping both to appease the tycoon and eliminate distrust. But as days passed, she realized finding an antidote was far more impossible than she had imagined, until one day Zhuo fell into a deep coma, and she understood she was running out of time, and thus she told the tycoon she wished to hand the antidote research over to Professor Roy, because she knew he would never refuse, since Nan was the child she shared with him. And out of love and guilt, the professor agreed, swallowing his fear and accepting the task because the situation was too entangled. And even though the tycoon insisted Ning must also take part, the professor pretended to agree, while secretly keeping her away. And the video he recorded was meant only to clear Ning's name, affirming that the jellyfish experiment was his decision alone. And though he had separated a bacteria-free version of the serum that might save Ning's mother, and Zhuo, Ning was crushed. Hearing all of this, regretting only that she could not end everything at once by letting them all turn into zombies, and San ignored her despair, cracked open the storage locker, and inside lay a tube of purified serum, likely the antidote, and Den comforted Ning until hope flickered back to life, knowing she needed to take that serum out of the campus no matter what. And at that same time, San's group launched their reckless operation to capture the zombie leader, having studied the zombie's habits in detail, arriving early at the cleaning lady's workplace, fanning out across intersections, and using flags to signal her movements. And Boo crouched at the lecture hall entrance tents as the staggering footsteps drew near, and the cleaning lady, now the zombie queen, arrived first as always. And Boo ducked behind a table, waited for her to pass, then sprinted to the stairway top, whipping the flag to signal the route was unfolding as predicted. And the others rushed toward the natural science dorm, where she always began her morning tasks, knowing they had to capture her alive before other zombies arrived, or none of them would survive. And that same morning, the punishing heat wave took another victim as the security guard collapsed, followed by a biology student. And because the cleaning lady had taken the drug the longest, her body spilled blood as she dropped. And at that exact moment, all the drug trial participants rose as infected attacking anyone nearby, and the entire university plunged into chaos. And this was the moment Den and Ning exited the lab, running straight into the cleaning lady at the stair landing. And both froze, and Ning remembered meeting her here before, and she tried softly asking if she recognized her. But the cleaning lady stared with a hollow expression, unmoving. And this terrified the ambush team, since the rest of the zombies would soon arrive for work. And Nan clenched his jaw, the plan had to proceed, and he burst from hiding, deliberately making noise to lure her. And Ning recognized his voice instantly, and raced after him, nearly throwing herself into danger. But Den yanked her back, allowing the cleaning lady to step into the ambush zone. And the moment she crossed the threshold, everyone launched their coordinated attack, restraining her exactly as planned. Someone threw a covering over her head, though her mouth remained exposed, and Den, swift and sharp, raised the gun and fired multiple shots toward the zombie's open jaws. At this moment, Den lunged forward, stopping Ning and begging her her not to act out of despair. But after uncovering so many buried truths, Ning had already lost all faith in this rotting world, and she pressed the professor's USB into Nan's hands, telling him to survive no matter what, revealing her intention to sacrifice herself and end everything, only for Den to suddenly whip out his gun and aim it at Nan, forcing Ning to drop the syringe, and exposing that he had long understood Ning wasn't thinking about saving anyone, she was simply running away, just like her mother had done. But Ning knew Den wouldn't shoot, so she tried to stab again before Nan frantically slapped the syringe aside. And at that exact heartbeat, the zombie smashed through the door, flooding the room as Den fired a deafening shot that instantly triggered the horde, sending them charging toward the sound. And Den cut down a few, but realized doom had arrived, so everyone bolted from the dormitory and raced down the stairs, only to find more zombies surging upward, leaving them no choice but to sprint toward the roof, while Den stayed behind to slow the horde until his bullets ran dry, and corridor after corridor collapsed behind them, until the rooftop became their last refuge, where they held the door with trembling arms as the infected forced their way closer. And just as collapse seemed certain, the helicopter carrying Professor Roy swept in overhead, and Ning panicked that they would open fire, so she held the jellyfish serum aloft, forcing the professor into relief as he confirmed both Ning and the serum were present, and ordered the pilot to descend immediately. And the girls dashed forward, hoping to board, only to freeze in disbelief when the announcement declared that only Ning was allowed on the helicopter, and Mo erupted in fury, demanding to know why they were being abandoned, and hurling curses as Den's shooting through the door bought them precious seconds, and the professor shouted Nan's name, urging him to board the aircraft, since saving even one person was better than losing all. But Nan's heart twisted violently, because how could he abandon friends who had bled and survived beside him? And Ning called out desperately, while Mo quietly removed the tube of zombie leader blood she had stolen earlier, and with hatred boiling in her eyes, decided that if one life had to be sacrificed, then Nan was the perfect offering. And Nan seemed to understand everything, and stood still, letting her plunge the syringe into his neck as Ning collapsed in tears, and the pilot immediately lifted the aircraft. But the cruel irony was that Den's group had already locked the stairwell with chains, meaning that even without turning Nan into a second-generation zombie, the group would not have been attacked at all. And 1 month later, the chief doctor reported that after the tycoon's eldest son received the serum, his vital signs had gradually stabilized. But for unknown reasons, Ning's mother, though physically healed, still had not awakened. And meanwhile, in a decaying abandoned building, Nan, now fully transformed, sat bound inside an iron cage surrounded by snarling zombies. And as he slowly lifted his head, a monstrous expression twisted across his face. At the exact moment Ning's mother suddenly awoke from her coma, her left eye glowing with a faint icy blue light. And the story ends here. Remember to like and follow the channel so you never miss the unfolding parts ahead. Up next, things get even crazier. The zombies hit harder, the escapes get tighter, and the twist is even more insane. And trust me, if this story shocked you, the next one will absolutely blow your mind. It is already on the channel, so go check it out right now.